More than anything else, I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain it? How could I say anything when I was still reeling from the sensation of his gaze on mine? The strange, dangerous pull I felt every time I looked at him. I didn't understand. It couldn't explain it. I just knew it was different. "Max," I whispered, my voice unsteady. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't immediately respond. His gaze never wavered, though I could see the corner of his mouth twitch, like he was holding back a grin. It was almost as though he was enjoying the discomfort he had created, watching me struggle with something I couldn't even name. His eyes remained calm, studying me intently. "It's not about what you understand, Ethan," he said, his voice low and calm. "It's about what you feel." I shook my head, the confusion making my pulse hammer in my chest. "This is wrong. You're my stepbrother. This is wrong, Max." Max's expression softened, though the intensity of his gaze didn't shift. He leaned in slightly, his hand brushing against my arm a touch that felt both tender and testing, as though he was waiting for me to react. "I know what you're feeling," he said softly, almost as if speaking to me like I was the one who was confused. "It's not wrong. It's just different." My heart raced as his words sank in. I was drowning in a sea of emotions, fear, desire, confusion, guilt. My mind screamed at me to push him away, to remind him that he was still just a kid, my stepbrother. But my body betrayed me. I didn't understand why, but another part of me, a buried part, was drawn to him, captivated by his confidence, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to know exactly what buttons to push to unsettle me, to pull me in, even as I resisted. "No," I said, my voice steadying. "This is wrong, Max. You need to leave, now." But Max didn't move. Instead, he leaned in again, and this time I felt his breath warm against my ear as his hand gently settled on my shoulder. The touch was light, almost tender, but there was an unsettling weight to it as though he was testing me, seeing how far I'd let him go. "I don't think you really want me to leave," he murmured, his voice low and thick with something I couldn't place. "I think you're just scared of what you want." I flinched at the words. It was as if he could see straight through me. There was a fear, yes, but it wasn't the kind I had imagined. It wasn't fear of him, no, it was fear of myself. Fear of what he was awakening in me. A desire I hadn't even realized existed until he exposed it. "Max, please," I whispered, my voice breaking as I pushed him away, my hands trembling. "This isn't what you want." He didn't pull back, though. His gaze held mine, unflinching, like he was trying to decode the puzzle I had become. "Don't lie to yourself, Ethan. I know what you want. You can't hide it anymore." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I didn't want any part of this. But the truth was, I was torn. Torn between what I knew was right and the overwhelming pull I felt every time I was near him. I should have been able to control myself. I should have been able to see through whatever game he was playing, to stand firm in the knowledge that this was wrong. But I couldn't. It was like I had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Max stood up from the bed, his eyes never leaving mine. He stepped back, and for a brief moment, his expression was unreadable, like he had been waiting for me to break. "You can't stop it, Ethan," he said softly, almost as though it were a fact. "You can't stop me, not now." I froze. The weight of his words hit me harder than I was prepared for. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Max wasn't going to walk away, and neither was I. Somehow, somewhere deep inside, I had already crossed a line I couldn't uncross. With a final glance, Max turned and walked out of the room without another word. He didn't need to say anything else. The silence in his wake was deafening. Sitting there, in the darkness, my mind whirled with a confusion I couldn't sort through. The feeling of his touch, the intensity in his eyes, the pull between us, it was overwhelming, and I couldn't escape it. The next few days felt like a slow burn. Max was everywhere. His presence seemed to press on my chest, weighing me down. Every time I saw him, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened between us. The kiss, the unspoken connection, the tension that had hung in the air. It was as though he had claimed something in me, something I hadn't even known was there until he awakened it. I tried to avoid him, tried to keep my distance, but it was impossible. Max was like a shadow that followed me everywhere. Every time I looked at him, my heart raced. Every glance, every moment felt charged, and he knew it. One evening after dinner, I sat on the couch, trying to focus on the television, but the quiet in the house felt suffocating. The silence was too heavy. Max had been distant, all evening quiet, barely looking at me. But then, after what felt like an eternity of stillness, he appeared in the doorway of the living room. His eyes locked onto mine, intense and unwavering, like he was pulling me in with the force of his gaze. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm but thick with something I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to face what had happened between us. I wanted to believe it was just a mistake, something I could forget. But Max wasn't going to let me do that. He was persistent. He always was. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. My throat felt dry, tight with fear, anticipation, and something else I couldn't name. "Come to my room," he said, his voice low, inviting. Before I could even think, my body was already moving. I couldn't stop it. I stood up, my heart pounding, unsure if I was afraid or excited or both. Maybe neither. All I knew was that I couldn't stop myself anymore. I had already made my choice, even if I didn't realize it. Max didn't wait for me to answer. He simply turned, walking toward the hallway, his movements confident, sure as though he had already planned this. He knew exactly how this night was going to unfold, and somehow, so did I. As we walked toward his room, the tension between us was palpable. It was like I was being pulled along by invisible strings, tethered to him in a way I couldn't understand, couldn't control. His steps were steady, and each one seemed to echo in the silence of the house, matching the frantic beat of my heart. When we reached his door, Max stopped and turned to face me. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto mine. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice almost too soft. "You know what's going to happen." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. I followed him inside. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't escape. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I stood there for a moment, my feet frozen to the floor, unsure of what to do, how to move, or even what to say. Max didn't seem to care that I was lost in thought. He moved around the room with purpose, as if everything was part of some plan that had been set into motion long before I had even understood what was happening. His presence felt so intense, as though his very being was pulling me into a place I hadn't signed up for, but somehow couldn't avoid. "You're scared," Max said, his voice low and steady, almost like he was reading my mind. I shook my head, trying to push down the rising tide of anxiety. "No, I'm not scared," I replied, though my voice wavered. I wanted to believe it. I really did. But the truth was, I didn't know what I was anymore. Max turned toward me, his eyes dark, searching like he was peeling back the layers of who I was. "Then why don't you leave?" His words were calm, but there was something in them, something that stung, like a challenge. I swallowed hard. I had been about to ask myself the same question. Why didn't I leave? Every instinct, every rational part of me told me to walk away, to get out of this room, to end this madness. But for some reason, my legs stayed rooted to the floor. My body was betraying me, moving against my will. I don't know," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the confession. The truth was, I felt helpless. There was something in the way Max looked at me, something in his calm demeanor that made me doubt everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. The lines had blurred, and now all I could focus on was the space between us, the tension that stretched taut and unbroken. Max didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room in a few long strides, his movements fluid and certain. I barely had time to react before he was standing in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. His hand reached out, brushing against my arm. The touch was light, almost gentle, but it felt like a promise. "You don't have to fight this anymore," Max said softly, his voice so calm it sent a chill through me. "You don't have to be afraid of what you feel." I wanted to push him away. I wanted to tell him that everything about this was wrong, that I didn't want any part of it, but the words stuck in my throat. What if he was right? What if there was something more to what I was feeling? Something deeper and more complicated than I could understand. Max's gaze was unwavering. He didn't look away. It was as if he was waiting for me to make a choice, to acknowledge what had been happening between us from the very beginning. The tension was palpable, thick in the air, surrounding us both. I tried to speak again, but my voice caught. There was nothing I could say that would change what was happening, and deep down I realized I didn't want to. Max smiled, almost imperceptibly, as though he had already won. His hand moved from my arm to my face, his fingers warm against my skin. He gently cupped my cheek, his thumb tracing slow circles, grounding me, or maybe pulling me under. "I've always wanted you, Ethan," Max whispered, the words soft yet full of intent. "I knew it from the first moment I saw you." The confession hit me harder than I expected. The weight of it was suffocating, but it was also undeniable. I could see it in the way he looked at Mezzo, sure of himself, so certain that what we were experiencing wasn't wrong. I wasn't sure I agreed, but the doubt had crept in. The lines between right and wrong, between what was acceptable and what wasn't, had already begun to dissolve. For a brief moment, I considered walking away, turning around and running out of the room, but I didn't. Something held me in place. The desire to run, to leave, was there. But so was the desire to stay, to see what would happen next, to understand what Max was offering in that moment. Before I could think, Max kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was filled with urgency, with a hunger that I hadn't expected. His lips were on mine, pressing hard, taking control. For a heartbeat, I was overwhelmed by the force of it, the intensity of the kiss. But then, just as quickly, something inside me shifted. I kissed him back, not because I wanted to, or because I was sure, but because I couldn't stop myself. His hands were on me now, moving with purpose, tracing over my chest, down my sides. Each touch seemed to erase my resistance, to unravel my doubts. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Max had always been good at reading me, at knowing exactly what to say to make me second-guess myself. I was lost, caught in a web of emotions I couldn't untangle. When I finally pulled away, breathless, I looked at him, my eyes wide with confusion. "This isn't right," I said. My voice felt hollow now. The words were weak, and I knew it. Max didn't look surprised. He only smiled again, a small, knowing smile. "It's not about what's right or wrong, Ethan," he said. "It's about what we want." And in that moment, I understood. I understood that there was no going back. The path I was on now wasn't one I could walk away from. Max had made me see that, whether I wanted to or not. He stepped back, his hands dropping to his sides, and I could see the shift in him too. The playful, confident mask was back. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice calm, almost certain. "You won't leave, Ethan. Not now." My heart skipped a beat. The finality of his words, the confidence with which he spoke, sent a chill down my spine. I had been trying to escape this, to resist it. But Max was right. I was already too far in. The moment had come, and there was no turning back. I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You don't have to do anything," Max replied, his smile softening just a fraction. "Just trust me. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." For a moment, I thought I might still be able to walk away, to turn the page and forget this chapter of my life. But deep down, I knew better. There was no escaping it. Max had already made sure of that. As I stood there, my mind swirling with confusion and fear, Max reached out again. His hand brushed my shoulder, a gentle reassurance. "Don't worry," he said softly. "You're already here, and so am I." And with that, I knew that I was trapped in a game I didn't fully understand, but one I couldn't seem to escape.